We're starting now with a really interesting panel discussion. From misinformation to digital security, Ireland's role in Europe's digital defence. And we have an outstanding panel, and I will invite the chair, Caitriona Heinl, to introduce the panel.
Great. So I've got the tech working. Is that? Yeah, all good. Great. So good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you so much to the team at ADAPT for bringing this panel of very senior, esteemed experts together. I hope you can hear me. If you can't, please make sure you let me know. So in terms of the overall kind of purpose, like what we're hoping to achieve through this discussion, we pretty much want to explore ICT threats, including the misinformation and disinformation landscape. So it's a little bit of a mix between cyber in its purest form and then disinformation, misinformation questions. And specifically focusing on Ireland's role as well as possible opportunity within the European landscape vis-a-vis resilience. So that's our purpose and aim today. Hopefully we'll get to the nub of the issues by the end. So to start, I would like to introduce the experts. I'm sure hopefully many of you know the team already. We have Professor Donna O'Shea, who is the Chair of Digital Engineering at UL, specialising in cybersecurity. We have Dr Eileen Culloty, who is Assistant Professor in the School of Communications and Deputy Director at the DCU Institute for Media, Democracy and Society. And then lastly, we have Richard Brown, Director of the National Cybersecurity Centre. So as you can see, we're in good hands. So we thought we had a pre-call about how to approach the questions, and we thought we'd kickstart with hearing from Richard, more of a kind of a state of play aspect vis-a-vis the domestic sphere. And what we would love to hear, Richard, from you is if you could give a sense to us today about progress to date relating to critical infrastructure protection and to the protection of services domestically. And while you're doing that, if you don't mind laying out kind of a state of play vis-a-vis the new national cybersecurity strategy. So we'll stop there. Thanks, Richard.
Okay. I'll try to keep it under an hour. And that's not a joke. So first of all, good afternoon, everybody. NCSC, National Cybersecurity Centre, our role is to monitor, detect and respond to risks in the cyber domain on behalf of the state. So we are a full spectrum National Cybersecurity Centre. We do everything from detecting and responding to criminal issues, the Gardaí prosecute, we just deal with the front end, to up to and including national security issues. So everything, basically. Where we are to date, so like most EU member states, all member states by now, we've established essentially three different things that are kind of worthy of note. One, we have a fully functional, well-resourced, certified cybersecurity incident response team, or CSIRT for short. So point one, we've built a response team. It is accredited since 2017. It continues to evolve. It has an evolving tool set. It consumes a huge amount of information and shares it in appropriate, segmented, classified ways with the stakeholders that need to get it. That's a very shorthand way of saying something very complex. The second thing we've done is we've gone out and we've formally identified critical infrastructure. So we've legally, under European and national law, identified the 120 or 30 entities that we believe are critical to the state, and we've obliged them to take appropriate, proportionate security measures to protect themselves, and then to report incidents to us. So we put ourselves at the centre, if you like, of a spider's web of legislative and other requirements that oblige critical infrastructure to protect themselves and also inform the state as to what's happening. And the third thing we've done, and this is much more conceptually interesting, is we've conducted a series of national cyber risk assessments. So formal assessments of what the real risks are to the services, to the state, to citizens, to people's lives. We've published one in 2023, was finished in 22. The second one is finished now. I've just got the final draft, and it'll be published in the coming weeks. What that does is it informs policymakers, government, so what the real risks are. Obviously, there's a classified version of it which won't ever be published. And it also then allows us, as part of an ongoing intelligence gathering, analysis and dissemination process, understand what the risks from cyber are in that broader context. As we all understand it, cyber is often part of a general hybrid or series of active measures. So by determining in a very formal binary, because cyber allows us to do that, way we can actually inform government policy making on security and defence matters more generally, because we can say definitively what is happening, or at least with some degree of definitive. So that's where we are right now. So we've spent a lot of the last 3 years getting ready for primary legislation, which will be published in the next couple of weeks, hopefully at the same time as our risk assessment, which will provide us with a substantially greater series of powers and roles, which we can obviously stand over given our experience and our appreciation of the risk thus far. But it also then will be part of a new national cybersecurity strategy, our third full strategy. The 2019 strategy had a very substantial upgrade in the midterm. And that strategy will essentially set out in much greater detail how we will be able to do a lot of augmented functions. So taking the 3 things that we've just spoken about. In the first instance, we will have far greater powers to intervene in issues. The aim of all of this is to shift our focus left. Not responding to incidents, but removing incidents from the board game before they ever come to be incidents. We're driving out vulnerabilities, driving out compromised systems from every part of the national IP address ecosystem. So we're forever, perennially driving risk down and out, lowering the risk and removing it. That's really, really complex and difficult to do in practice. If anybody wants more detail on that, I'd be happy to provide it. The second thing we hope to be able to do in all of this is dramatically broaden the range of critical infrastructure operators. So right now, like I said, 125 to 30, depending on the day. We expect that under this new legislation, which transposes an EU directive, we'll go to about 4,500. So that's a substantial increase in anybody's metrics. That gives us, of course, much greater understanding as to what's happening, much greater penetration of our regulatory measures, but also, in a really important way, a recursive link back in to help those organisations. Because we can dramatically broaden the amount of information we take in, we can enrich using our own analytical processes, we can then feed those people back better information. Not just, this is an economics question. The marginal cost here is, for us, if each additional entity is low, but the benefit to them also exists. So we're in that kind of space. And the last piece is in the national security space, whereby A, we'll have obviously greater national security powers under this legislation, but B, looking forward and looking at the types of analytical product we can provide to government and to stakeholders like the Defence Forces and the Gardaí, who both have distinct national security roles of their own, will grow substantially. So the NCSC will be in a position, we know we have the capabilities now, just not the legal powers, to provide dramatically augmented understanding of what the world looks like from our perspective, what the real risks are, what threat actors, bad guys are seeking to do to us, with us, and to others using our infrastructure. And that's it.
Great.
That's 7 minutes.
Thank you, Richard. And we will open up for questions and discussion towards the end. So hopefully if you have anything you want to speak to, please do then. I think I will, keeping that line of thinking surrounding cybersecurity, I think I'll move to Donna. Again, focusing on cybersecurity before we move across to disinformation and misinformation. If we build out on what Richard has focused upon, but focus primarily on the research agenda. Donna, from your experience or from your based on your expertise, how do you think the research agenda is evolving from prior security approaches to a more focus on resilience and recovery?
Yeah, I'm looking at Richard's notes here in envy, with a few little bullet points written down. I have a whole page. Look, I think that it's quite informative actually listening to Richard there, and he's talking about shifting left, and I think the research community is actually shifting right. So we're actually moving away from this whole defensive, cybersecurity risk towards resilience and recovery. So we're actually moving in the opposite direction to Richard. And I actually think there's actually 2 parts to this question. So the first is, what is defensive security? And, traditionally, when I was working in cybersecurity in the beginning, and when I started this journey with Richard back in 2019, when we were working and contributing to the National Cybersecurity Strategy, it was all about developing systems, such as firewalls, access control, better encryption, that were really focused on defence and minimising risk. Defensive measures didn't just include these types of systems and these, measures. It also included, having really strong cybersecurity risk frameworks such as NIST CSF and ISO 27001, which really kind of gave structure around the whole cybersecurity and better accountability, and also improving cybersecurity awareness to remove kind of more, I suppose, more of the human risk. And then all, wrap that up with a regulation and, I suppose, raising the profile and minimising the risk at a national level. And all these approaches are what we call cyber defence, right? This is the traditional approach. But what we've recognised and what the research community has recognised and evolved over time is that it doesn't matter how strong your systems are, it doesn't matter how good your technology is, it doesn't matter how good the people are. The reality is a cyber security attack is going to happen or may happen in the future. And we need to move towards resilience, which is a fundamentally different concept in cybersecurity research. Now, there is a problem with the word resilience because it's overused. You've heard it in this event today, but in general, it's a very overused term, and it's also polysymic in nature. And what I mean by that is that its meaning can differ slightly depending on the domain and the context it being used. But when I think of the word resilience, I kind of go back to the image of Brian O'Driscoll in the Grand Slam back in 2009, when he's on the line, defending, adapting, withstanding, an English attack, and winning. In cybersecurity, it's similar, right? It's about preparing for, adapting to, withstanding attacks, and by attacks that threaten the survival of your business. And in the field of resilience and cybersecurity, what we're really talking about is using agentic AI for reasoning, using transformer-based threat detection, implementing zero trust principles into practice, looking at quantum-safe algorithms and privacy-preserving mechanisms. We also need to evolve the way that we actually use our cybersecurity risk management frameworks, which are very static and very much based on check boxes and, implement this. And we need to move them, from this static methodology into something that's much more dynamic and that responds and adapts over time. And we need to do that as researchers in a really complicated environment where we have cyber physical systems and the Internet of Things, which is expanding our threat landscape. But then we need to apply all this knowledge to different domains. And every domain is different, whether it's healthcare, smart manufacturing, all their challenges are different. The regulatory compliance is different. And this is an increasingly complex landscape for us as researchers to operate in. And I guess the key question here, and the question, just go back to the question about moving from defence to resilience, I guess what we're trying to do in the research community is not have a static system, but a system that molds and adapts, that responds dynamically. And that's where I believe the way that the researcher community is evolving and will evolve over time.
Great, thank you very much, Donna. Thank you. So, Eileen, we're going to move across to misinformation and, informational questions. So, related to cybersecurity, but different, field onto its own. So, on that note, Eileen, would you mind explaining how you consider countering disinformation with a view to fitting into democratic policy making? And we'll start there and then ask the next question. Thank you.
I think the most important thing to know about disinformation from a democratic perspective is that it is not illegal to believe or say false things, and nor should it be. There's very, very fundamental democratic freedoms that need to be protected. That makes disinformation extremely challenging from a policy perspective. Because on the one hand, we know from countless surveys, you can look at Eurobarometer surveys, people are extremely worried about disinformation, about the impact of it. They believe they're exposed to lots of it, and they believe it is having a detrimental impact on their democracies and their societies. So it's a serious problem. And then on the other hand, there is this extremely tricky question of how to address it. And so the solution tends to be to not focus on disinformation content, but to look at ways that you might discourage the creation and propagation of this content on online platforms, and then also increase, and I use the word resilience, it is one of those massively overused words, but over the long term to increase non-punitive responses. So that would be things like increasing the capacity of journalists and fact checkers and independent researchers to go out and investigate who is spreading disinformation, what are they saying, are these things true, do we have evidence otherwise, to increase media literacy, to change the education system to build up better understanding and critical thinking. Those are all fantastic, but as you can imagine, changing the education system, improving media literacy across the whole population are massive long-term goals. They don't help us in the immediate term. So from a policy perspective, what we have in Europe with the Digital Services Act, and I think the Digital Services Act, have you all heard of the Digital Services Act? It suffers a little bit from having been massively overhyped as kind of Europe is getting tough on the platforms. And now that we see what the Digital Services Act actually does, people might feel a little bit disappointed. But if you think about this democratic problem, the Digital Services Act specifically does not focus on content. So in Ireland, our digital services coordinators do not have the power to tell platforms to remove content. Unless it's illegal, because something that's illegal shouldn't be there in the first place. But things that are just harmful, so false claims about something, they do not have the power to remove those. What the Digital Services Act does is it asks the platforms themselves to mitigate harms and risks and to report to national and European regulators what are they doing to mitigate risks. So it's very much in this co-regulatory risk mitigation model. The problem with that is that it assumes that the platforms are doing all of this in good faith, that they genuinely, really, really do want to mitigate risks, and it's not that hard to identify platforms that don't have any interest in these things. And then it comes down to, well, when is the Commission going to call their bluff and actually charge them for not? And that's going to be very controversial, and that will be dragged out through courts. Again, that's a long-term thing. And the second problem with it is that the entire model relies on researchers, often civil society organizations, to go and monitor harmful content and to do that work of reporting. They're often not funded to do it. They often come under attack. So if you think of something like Elon Musk just openly threatening civil society organizations and researchers, even politicians who try and counter hate speech. So that's a massive, massive problem. And we're still only at the beginning of that. I think that's what's going to play out over the next couple of years. So if you put all of that together, we have kind of ideas for what we can do over the long term, and it's what we do in the immediate term that is the big concern. And I should say that the work I do is with EDMO, which is part of an EU-wide network where in each country there's an EU hub. So through the ADAPT Centre and in DCU, we coordinate the Ireland hub. So that funds fact-checking, media literacy and research. And then what we see is that the impacts on the ground are really negative. So electoral interference is the thing everyone's most concerned about, foreign interference, and that's where it crosses over into some of the cybersecurity threats. But the stuff that you can already see is charities and community organizations, sports teams, librarians, teachers saying that they are afraid that people are going to harass them if they talk about certain topics. They're afraid to post things online about their work for the volume of abuse that they will get in return. They're afraid to put non-white people front and center because they know they'll be encountering racist abuse. Like, these are very real detrimental impacts to the quality of our democracy. And I don't have a response or idea of how exactly we counteract that, but we have these immediate impacts and this very, very long-term risk mitigation response.
Eileen, thank you. We were chatting about this briefly, informally, at the break. I'm not sure that people are really as aware as that, Eileen, about what is actually happening in the domestic sphere and the kind of types of incidents that you're describing. So thank you for laying that out. What I'd like to do is stay with this focus on the European regulatory approach, actually. And if you don't mind, Richard, maybe you could lay out to us this afternoon some of the developments within the EU regulatory structure, as well as some of the domestic implementation aspects that you've been working on through NCSE.
Yeah, sure, and I'll pick up on a few bits and pieces as well, because it actually kind of hangs together. So to begin with, and just to go back for a second, our national risk assessment really calls out 3 thematic areas of risk that face the state, and that's common with nearly every EU member state. The proximity or the nature of your economy may flex and amend some of the risks in a very precise way, but they're essentially the same risks. One of them is obviously we're in a much more dynamic geopolitical environment. We all understand that. Those risks relate obviously to Russian military activity in Central and Eastern Europe and elsewhere, looking at hybrid threats. They relate to a dramatically more empowered and active China in a number of different realms. And they also relate to the fact that America is both withdrawing tacitly or otherwise some of its support for the Western alliance, but at the same time promising to be more active in terms of the use of its own cyber tools, which in turn, without getting too geekish about it, could potentially lead to a further diminution in responsible state behaviour online and a degradation of the cyber risk and response environment. The second piece is that we're still, and to Donna's point, in a situation where both the technological base upon which cybersecurity depends, the devices we purchase, the services we use, even the devices that your service providers purchase are broken. We still see regular, ongoing shipment of software products from large entities that have multiple vulnerabilities in them. We publish advisories on our website, maybe not on a daily basis, but certainly we circulate them to our peers on a daily basis, of new vulnerabilities in popular software and hardware products, which essentially means that we're chasing our tail. Every vulnerability we fix, every entity we help with a vulnerability, there's more coming along behind. So we're playing a collective game of whack-a-mole. And the third piece is supply chain. So in other words, we have a range of obvious supply chain problems, some of them relating to technology coming into the European Union from countries who may not have our best interests at heart and may seek to use those products, those services in ways which we don't want or don't meet our values. So those are the 3 thematic things. And the European regulations in various different ways seek to meet those in different ways. So the first one is obviously NIS2. And NIS2, to Donna's point, is about resilience. It's about driving resilience out into the environment, out into companies who provide services, so they can't avoid it. So in a very practical sense, and we see this because we do compliance on a day-to-day basis, entities might feel that they're mature. They might feel that they are resilient. They might feel that they've taken the appropriate measures. But in many ways, they haven't. And that's because, A, of information asymmetries within the organisation, a lack of willingness to invest in the issue. They may simply not know. There may be no one in that organisation capable or competent of understanding the societal or technical risks that they bear. That's fine for them, but when society depends on those service providers, we collectively have a problem. So NIS2 is about driving out those 4,500 entities. No, you are important. You might not think you are, but you're important to society, and society is going to make sure that you are secure. That's not simple. There's huge cost and scalar implications for that, and I'll talk about our implementation of NIS2 in a second in terms of why we're doing things in a particular way. But the next things that are coming, and there's 2 that are material. One is something called the Cyber Resilience Act. Again, I know it sounds like it's the same thing as NIS2. It's not. What CRA will do is it will essentially compel people selling products and services to make sure those products and services are secure. Right? That will involve a European certification scheme using the CE mark and specific security measures across 13 different classes of products. It's a huge thing. But what it will mean is that in 3, 4, 5 years' time, if you're buying a product in Europe and it carries the CE mark, then it is secure. It won't fall out of support in 2 or 3 years' time. It won't be delivered to your door with 0 security precautions. Because right now, many services you buy have nothing. And they are broken out of the box, essentially. The last piece is a revision of, sorry for the acronyms, the EU Cybersecurity Act, or CSA. And what that's going to do is compel, we expect, because it's not published yet, and it will be during our presidency, which will make it even more interesting. But we expect that it will have measures on third-party service providers. In other words, those people providing security services to you, that they're sufficiently capable to provide those services. That's the EU environment. It's vast. It covers critical infrastructure. It covers products of providers. It covers people who are providing cybersecurity services. So it's the entire universe. And this is a 5-year plan to actually deliver. What we're doing domestically to try and deal with this is to focus on, from our perspective, implementing NIS2 in a proportionate, risk-based manner. In other words, we are going to drive progress where the risks are highest, and and it's not risks to an entity, it's risks to society. So, in other words, we're agnostic as to whether an entity is public or privately owned, whether it's large or small. Our concern is it important to society? So our regulatory process would be driven by that risk-based piece. It would be data-driven, which is really important. We will be able to use our scanning tools and other national security powers to understand where the risks are, not just in terms of the importance or criticality of the entity, but the risks they are at due to the actions of others. Because the main global cyber threat actors have significant doctrinal differences. They behave in different ways towards different people. And we need to understand that too and use those data to drive our regulatory interventions. And also then collect regulatory data and present them in the national security context, which is a really important piece. The other thing we need to be able to do, obviously, and the CRA is important here, is to work very closely across Europe. So looking at NIS2, what we've done is we've joined a single European certification scheme called Cyber Fundamentals. And that is designed to ensure we can be dynamic, to Donna's point. We're not static in the face of changing technological events or changing threat actor behavior. We can actually be dynamic in our regulatory response to push changes out into the ecosystem using our own regulatory tools or using SciFun so that we're forever ahead of the curve, or at least not too far behind the curve. So this is really about being efficient, being fast, and being data-driven, and not being stuck in I don't mean to be rude about our UK colleagues, a 1970s style bureaucracy where everything takes as long as it'll take. This is not a yes minister thing. This has to be much, much faster than that, or it simply won't work.
That's great. I was so busy taking notes, Richard. That was fantastic. Thank you. For those of you who haven't had an opportunity to read Richard's bio, just with a view to some of the interlinkages vis-a-vis national security and international security, Richard did serve as the Deputy Director of NSAC, which is our National Security Analysis Centre, for quite some time. So it's a perfect marriage of the different lanes vis-a-vis regulation, what to expect on future legislation, and also understanding the national security policy environment. So very last question to Donna, and then we'll be opening up for discussion. I think Olivia has me very sharp on time so that we finish in line with your agenda. So Donna, having heard all that, and again putting on your, from the perspective of research, so to speak, what models of collaboration do you think have been or are the most successful vis-a-vis progressing the field of cybersecurity research?
Yeah, I think that the word collaboration is very important here. I mean, we're attending an event today where the collaboration seems to be the theme of the day. I was attending a University of Ireland conference in Queen's University, Belfast, last week, and the theme of the conference was collaborating for change. And I think that collaboration is becoming so important now in an era of geopolitical uncertainty. I feel very privileged to work in an industry where collaboration is actually in the industry's DNA. This is very unlike other sectors. Actually cybersecurity companies have been forced, it's not by design, it's not by choice, but they have been forced over time to collaborate. We can see this through models such as, ISACs and CERTs, where, competitors across the industry are actually sharing threat intelligence information. And they actually share findings as well in the event of an attack. I think the best example of this in Ireland is in the HSE attack when that actually happened. There was an incident response room set up, and Ernst & Young, Accenture and PwC were all in the same room, in a hands-on deck, all hands-on-deck type of response, and that's really unique in the cybersecurity industry. At a national level, we can see this collaboration working in practice. We have Cyber Ireland, which is our national cybersecurity cluster. It's one of the biggest privileges in my career to have been one of the PIs in establishing Cyber Ireland back in 2018. And this is a tripartite collaboration between academia, industry and government. And in my view, it is I believe it is the most successful industry cluster that has been established by Cyber Ireland. And even if you just attended the Cyber Ireland conference last week, there were 450 attendees. And again, I think this is kind of borne back to the fact that the industry, by its nature, in its DNA, is collaborative and supportive and is used to supporting each other through a shared mission. I think collaboration, I suppose, at a research level and just trying to draw that collaboration from beyond the cluster into research has been difficult. And I think that has been a difficulty, and is something that I'm very passionate about, trying to increase the collaboration and the advancement of cybersecurity research. I think we suffer from some structural problems in Ireland. The cluster, while there are a lot of people working in cybersecurity, we're actually fragmented across different academic institutions, which makes it difficult to collaborate. I think that if you look at the National Cybersecurity Index, and Richard is very familiar with the National Cybersecurity Index, it rates countries based on their cybersecurity performance. There is a very interesting metric within that which rates Ireland at 0 in research, development and innovation in cybersecurity, and it has done so over a past number of years. Now, this rating seems, I suppose, very difficult to actually fully interpret, and that is because cybersecurity is considered a technical subfield of computer science, and as a result, it's not given its own unique identifier. It's called an NCAD identifier, so it's actually very difficult to track how much money is actually going into cybersecurity on a year-on-year basis. I think that the centre model has been very effective at facilitating collaboration, but there is no dedicated research centre in cybersecurity, and there's a nuance, between doing cybersecurity research, AI for cybersecurity, and cybersecurity for AI, and that is it's a nuance, but it is significant, and has impacted national collaboration in cybersecurity. I guess one of the most successful advancements is, the HEA in its recent announcement under the North-South Research Programme has funded Cyber Unite, which is a programme that I lead in University of Limerick in collaboration with CSET in Queen's and MTU and UCC. And I think this is kind of a significant advancement. It's the first medium-scale investment in collaborative cybersecurity funded by the government. And I hope that it will serve as a model going forward in facilitating further collaboration and, I suppose, addressing our own NCSI collaboration. I think as well, from a kind of a funding authority, Research Ireland has viewed cybersecurity maybe more applied and fundamental. But I think that narrative has to change, because we need to drive fundamental capacity and capability in cybersecurity, especially in the era of AI, and to make sure that our digital development and cybersecurity indexes are all aligned. I just also want to just talk about maybe at a European level, of course, we're not all reliant on national funding. We can go to Europe and look for funding under the, EU horizon. And Irish researchers have been very successful in getting funding at an EU level, and that's been brilliant. But there are challenges. In Ireland, we have about 650 companies that are cybersecurity companies. 50% of them are SMEs, 50% of them are multinationals, but 75% of the employment exists in the multinational sector. So if you're going to Europe and you want to collaborate with one of your Irish partners, it's most likely going to be a US-based multinational. And under the digital sovereignty and this whole strategic autonomy, that is very difficult to bring in a US partner into a cybersecurity research proposal. So that again makes things very difficult. So I guess going forward, we need to kind of keep building on a collaboration. It seems to be kind of a long burn in trying to establish collaboration, for cybersecurity research. I believe we can do this by, a shared infrastructure for driving cybersecurity research in the form of, cyber ranges for testing and evaluating our cybersecurity research solutions through kind of data spaces where companies can share the data without worrying about digital sovereignty rules or privacy preservation, and also by looking at cross-domain networks, so looking at the intersection with cybersecurity with other disciplines such as law and management and psychology, and examine the socio-technical and psychosocial elements of cybersecurity. And I think this is really where the main collaboration for cybersecurity research is going to be forward. Sorry, that was very long-winded.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you so much, Donna. And congratulations on your All-Ireland collaboration and hopeful success with the new centres. Certainly, I guess my ears pricked up by your suggestion that we need more kind of legal scholars or legal expertise in this field. I mean, it does feel like death by regulation. I don't envy you, Richard, with your work on the implementation side. So I'm going to open up to the room. I'm very conscious in terms of imposter syndrome. We're in a room of very highly established experts across the board. So really, I hope if we can have an organic conversation for 5 or 10 minutes. Olivia will tell me when to kind of cut it off. Okay, I'm getting 2 to 3 minutes. So please, I think I... oh, thank you very much. Sure, Declan, thank you.
So just a quick, a very interesting discussion. But Eileen, I hadn't realised that point that you made about people who are scared to talk about their work or to publish work or to put people from different minority groups forward. I hadn't realised it, but it's a sort of an invidious thing. And I wondered the extent to which that sort of victimisation or targeting or reputation assault kind of maybe straddles the two worlds of cybersecurity and the area that you're interested in.
I'm not sure maybe what the others think of that, but what we're looking at the moment is just very much on the ground at community levels, because our democracies and societies kind of live and die at that very local community level. And it's this sense of the things that used to just be online and you could say, well, I'm not going to go on Twitter, so I don't have to encounter it, that they've now rapidly moved into these offline spaces. That's a challenge as well, because we invested quite a lot in developing maybe online tools and working very closely with computer scientists to maybe track online abuse and be able to flag it and investigate it. Often, looking at anonymous accounts and bots, and now they're people they're people that are walking into shops and abusing people. So.
No, I don't have any further to add to that. I think that's.
Hi, thanks very much. That was really interesting. Just this is another one for Eileen. You talked about media literacy as being a long-term strategy. I'm just wondering, I see that as really, really critical and an immediate need. Are you aware of anything from the Department of Education, for example, that is actively looking at this across all levels of education in Ireland?
Yeah, I'm happy to say I'm the co-chair of Media Literacy Ireland. There's loads of plans for media literacy. With education, I mean, it's changing the curriculum is a really slow process, and there is loads of work going into that. Currently, media literacy is an option on if you do transition year. But we did a project where we looked at teacher training, and our teachers trained. And it's very simple. It applies whether it's cybersecurity, any topic. If teachers don't feel confident about a topic, they're not going to want to talk about it. None of us want to feel stupid, particularly around teenagers in our care. So now we're switching focus to maybe thinking about what are we doing to make sure the teachers themselves feel equipped and confident to have these discussions.
So I was at the AI Summit in Paris last year, and there was a talk there from Taiwan. And one of the things that seemed to strike me there, I understood from that presentation that Taiwan, in some ways, is number one in the number of attacks it deals with every year on its cybersecurity. But also in terms of mis and disinformation, they had gone through a very structured approach in terms of, from a very young age, teaching children to fact check. So rather than educating by rote and getting people to learn from books, the idea was that everything that was presented in a book was presented as something that the students were given a project to go and check and find multiple sources. So I was wondering, from Ireland, are we engaging with Taiwan or internationally, who are we partnering with, either on the cybersecurity or on the mis and disinformation side, in terms of bringing best practice and informing best practice?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about our collaborating partners. I guess like the US has traditionally been very far ahead in terms of cybersecurity, and we have a strategic partnership with the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative, which is a larger scale initiative in cybersecurity in the US, and other strategic partnerships with other universities in the US. Obviously in Europe, and I suppose not in Europe, but in the UK, CSIT and Queen's is the world leader and an international exemplar exemplar in cybersecurity, and that's why Cyber Unite is so important, because again we can learn not just collaboration and research level, but also learn how they have established Belfast as a centre of RD&I excellence in Ireland, and how we can collaborate for change and advance that further. Taiwan is an interesting example. I guess it has its own geopolitical challenges, but I guess, I suppose personally, I view cybersecurity, as a strategic priority. We need to develop our own sovereign capabilities in the same way, I suppose, that semiconductors is a kind of a big issue in Taiwan, and I think that we probably have a lot to learn in terms of I suppose, from the semiconductor industry and trying to position and develop our own national capability here in Ireland to make sure that when we need these capabilities, we'll have them in-house to be able to protect our industry and societies going forward.
Great. So I don't want to cause any more distress for Olivia. Richard, any last thoughts, and we'll close the session, and Eileen, of course, and then we'll thank everybody.
Fighting the urge to be contrarian and speak for about 20 minutes. No, just really quickly, international cooperation. Taoiseach spoke about this yesterday. He's a great man to retain a brief. So we have an integrated tailored partnership programme at NATO, where we have ongoing, very useful bilateral relationships with a whole lot of countries around Europe, US, UK, and in Asia. So we had a team who played in the South Korean national exercise in September. We sent 3 people over. So those international relationships are critical in aiding us not just to build our own domestic capability, to understand that we're doing what we should be doing in the way we should be doing it, but also to ensure we have the information sharing arrangements, including the technical, secure information sharing, so we can share information in times of crisis, which we've done. And HSE is an example. We were able to share information outwards, like on that Friday morning, but also then receive information which is extremely useful to us from peers around Europe, within the European Union and places like Norway. So bilateral is everything, but the national sovereignty thing is kind of the whole ballgame too.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Eileen, do you want to?
Yeah, I'd just say Finland is the kind of gold standard for media literacy and education, and they have a national agency that oversees all education in relation to media across all levels, but also people in further education, people who are out of school. And we had the head of that agency over last year for a keynote, and people wanted to know, so how do you do this? And he said, we started in the 1970s. So.
Oh, that was a dour note to end on. We were doing so well, but thank you. I was going to say thank you so much and congratulations on all the great work across the board. And I think everybody here would like to wish you all great success. And thank you, everybody, for having us. And thank you, Declan and Olivia and the team. So I think we'll close off there. Yeah, unless Declan wants to say anything, but nope, all good.